Welcome back. We're talking about the meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and DPRK leader Kim Jong Un. Still with us, Song Zhang is the Washington, D.C. bureau chief for Shanghai Wen Hui Daily. Arthur Dong is a professor at Georgetown University. Myung-koo Kang is a professor at Baruch College at the City University in New York. And Jonah is a senior political strategist at the Rand Corporation. And Arthur, let me start with you this time around. What's your view on what we heard about the fact that this meeting more or less takes the military option off the table for the United States, takes regime change off the table? And how does one square that with a key U.S. demand that there be no nuclear weapons in the DPRK?
Well, I think the point that's being made is a very important one. Kim Jong Un, going into this discussion, is confronted with a number of sort of options with regard to what the United States demands. That a nuclearized North Korea certainly poses a threat to key U.S. allies in the region, Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines, and the like. And this is something that is of very, very high priority to the United States. I do not think this is lost on the consciousness of Beijing's policymakers either. I think China realizes the importance of this issue. And in order for North Korea to lead, to be on a path towards more normalized relations, as well as greater security and stability, and certainly a better economic future, this is the issue that is going to be front and center.
Jonah, in that respect, both the United States and are of one mind, aren't they? They do not want nuclear weapons on the Korean Peninsula.
I think that's true, but I think Myung-koo Kang brought up a very important point. Mr. Kim is not going to give up his nuclear weapons. It is almost inconceivable that he would do that. He talks about denuclearization, but his father also talked about denuclearization, and it means a very different thing than Mr. Trump and Mr. Bolton think that it means. What denuclearization means from Mr. Kim's perspective is an end to all hostilities between North Korea and all of its adversaries, the United States, South Korea, and Japan most principally. I think anything that is premised on giving up a very mature nuclear program is really just headed for disappointment.
I will follow. I think it's not necessary to speculate whether Kim will be really willing to drop his nuclear capacity. I think the nuclear capacity for Mr. Kim finally is going to be protecting his regimes or his country's security from the threats from Washington and other allies. And I think finally, if Mr. Kim will be given very strong security assurance, and they can have another way to peaceful development, they may have a chance to.
Right, but if he is given strong security guarantees, why would he need a nuclear arsenal then?
I think till this moment, he is not kind of confident on any specific country, especially China. They believe this America is their biggest threat, but China is not completely clear that China will be protecting Kim. But with this nuclear arsenal, they are strong enough to have the leverage to finally force America and its allies to guarantee its national security, and China can be a supporter on this matter.
Myung-koo Kang, any agreement that is made, any deal that is struck, do you see the fact that it might ultimately have to incorporate an acceptance that the DPRK keeps its nuclear weapons? Do you see the United States, China, the rest of the region accept that?
It depends. I mean, time frame will be very critical. So from this summit meeting, what I really pay attention to is the third part, development. The President Xi Jinping emphasized three things. One is peace, and then stability. So we have already discussed these two things. But the third aspect is development. So the President Xi Jinping and then Kim Jong Un seems to have talked about supporting or transformation of the North Korean economy from a longer term point of view. So how to make North Korea or regional from region-wide, development. So President Xi Jinping highlighted the Chinese characteristics of socialism. So who knows, they talked about the North Korean style of socialism, or a little bit more market-conforming measures, opening North Korean society to Western investment or some sort of economic cooperations from a longer-term point of view. But from our American side point of view, immediate and short-term resolution of nuclear capability is quite critical. But I think from this summit meeting, President Xi Jinping and then Kim Jong Un seems to have talked about medium-term and longer-term strategic plan of opening North Korea or emulating the Chinese style economic reforms in the future. I think that aspect is very important. It means that to a certain degree, President Xi Jinping seems to have acknowledged the temporary nuclear capability, not immediate denuclearization measures. I think that's very important. And then another thing is that China was a major player who reached a truce agreement at the end of the Korean War. So China is a major player.
Right.
So from Kim Jong Un's point of view, he needs to inform to the Chinese, leader and the government that my basic strategic goal in the coming, summit meeting with President Trump is basically ending the Korean War. So he may need to, inform such kind of his strategic plan.
Right.
I think that is a very important point.
Okay, Song, as you've pointed out, China has a vested interest in getting a settlement here, some kind of agreement. The DPRK is, of course, a neighboring country to China. We looked at the pictures of the meeting. We saw these very cordial exchanges between the two first families. There was a picture there of Kim Jong Un introducing his wife to President Xi Jinping. It all looked very friendly. But what do we know about the personal relationship between President Xi Jinping and Kim Jong Un? Because if you remember, in 2016, when President Xi was hosting the G20 in China, that was the time that Kim Jong Un chose to launch ballistic missiles, which took some of the limelight away from that G20.
Definitely. I will say that President Xi Jinping and President Kim Jong Un didn't have a lot of sweet memories in the last a couple of years, especially if we see North Korea repeatedly testing nuclear weapons and ICBM at very sensitive times of China. I think Xi Jinping has a reason to dislike Kim Jong Un, but there are other two very important facts on this issue. One is that China's fundamental difference with DPRK is on this nuclear issue. If Mr. Kim will be firmly committed to denuclearization issue, I think the most difficult part of our relationship with DPRK will be no more. Second is that DPRK has been China's ally in Northeast Asia. And even today, we are not so much talking about that. We still want to see a regular or even kind of warm relationship. In the final, in the coming future, if DPRK will dismiss its nuclear arsenal and have a very great cooperation with Chinese government, that would be wonderful for China. So I don't think personally Xi will hate or like Mr. Kim Jong Un.
It's going to be pragmatic. Yeah.
That's right.
Right. Arthur, given what we've seen in the past, like these missile launches, are there political and diplomatic risks for President Xi Jinping? In essence, he's taken the lead in this right now. Are there risks?
Of course. The political risk here is that rather than being sort of observant and, in a sense, subservient to the interests of China, that Kim Jong Un goes rogue again and completely ignores any sort of the prescriptions as well as recommendations that are emanating from Beijing. If he decides to go rogue, then this could be potentially embarrassing, both to Xi Jinping and certainly sort of an assertion that I don't respect Chinese authority here.
Jonah, if we look at the foreign policy team here in Washington right now, President Trump has replaced some key members. Mike Pompeo takes over as Secretary of State. John Bolton, as we've heard, becomes National Security Advisor. These are hardliners. Bolton, as we've heard, would like to see a strike on the DPRK. Could that even be considered now?
Frighteningly, it could be considered and is being considered. I have great hope, or at least I have to rely on the hope, that behind the scenes there is a wiser counsel being put forward from the Pentagon, because to be honest, there are no good military options, and nobody who has looked at the military options thinks otherwise. That's just a fact. It's really rather ironic that the power here is with China, both on the positive and the negative side. China has the ability, if anyone does, to persuade Mr. Kim to advance forward towards denuclearization, either through incentives, that is, either through a massive investment program, or through the possibility not of a military reprisal, but simply of not backing up his play quite as sufficiently. Washington thinks it has the power, but really Beijing has the power here, to the extent that anyone has the power.
Right. Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for joining us. That's all we have time for, but the conversation continues online. Chat with us about this or any other show on Twitter. We're at CGTN America, or visit us on Facebook. That's facebook.com/CGTN America. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.